A Great Argead Saga Alexine, Alexander the Great. Volume 2, Eurydice, The Sacred Band. By Macaulay Naki. Episode 9, Shadow of the Strategist. 7:30 a.m., Day 3, The Training Grounds of the Cadmea. The morning mist clung to the dirt of the parade grounds, thick and cold. Philip, Antigonus, Peithon, and Leonnatus stood at attention, their chests heaving from the warm-up laps, but their posture was stiffer than usual. The air felt heavy with a different kind of gravity. Walking across the field toward them were the two men they saw daily, Pelopidas and Epaminondas, but between them walked a man whose presence seemed to quiet the very wind. It was Epaminondas. He wore no flamboyant crest or gilded greaves, just a simple soldier's tunic and a cloak the color of the Theban earth. "Easy, Peithon," Leonnatus whispered out of the corner of his mouth, noticing his friend's knees shaking slightly. "He's just a man." "No," Philip murmured, his eyes locked on the approaching general. "He's the man who broke Sparta. Look at how he walks. He isn't looking at us, he's looking at the ground as if it's a map." As the three leaders halted before the boys, the silence was absolute. Pelopidas looked amused by their tension, but Epaminondas was silent, his sharp analytical eyes scanning the four Macedonians. He wasn't looking for bulging muscles. He was looking at their stance, their eyes, and the way they held their practice spears. "They have the fire of the north in them," Epaminondas said, breaking the silence. "But they are still learning to contain it." Epaminondas stepped closer to Philip, stopping only a foot away. The prince of Macedon smelled not of perfume or wine, but of old parchment and the sharp tang of iron. "You are the son of Amyntas," Epaminondas said. It wasn't a question, but a statement of fact. His voice was melodic, yet it carried the weight of a decree. "In the wrestling pits, do you fight to win, or do you fight to learn why your opponent lost?" Philip swallowed the dryness in his throat, finding his voice. "I fight to see the pattern, General. A victory without a lesson is just luck." Epaminondas nodded slowly, then turned his gaze to the others. "And you? Antigonus, Peithon, Leonnatus. Do you know why you stand in this specific order?" The boys looked at each other, momentarily stunned. Antigonus spoke up, his voice gravelly. "Because the Peithon tribes told us to, General. A soldier who only moves because he is told is a slave to the whistle," Epaminondas countered, his voice rising just enough to command the entire field. "You stand in this order because Philip is your pivot. Antigonus, you are the anchor. Leonnatus and Peithon, you are the wings. If one of you moves without knowing the intent of the other, you are not a unit. You are four boys waiting to be killed." He reached out and adjusted the grip of Peithon's spear, moving his hand back an inch. "Precision is the only thing that survives the chaos of the charge. The Spartan survives because he is a wolf. The Theban survives because he is part of a soul. Which will you be?" The three generals began to walk away, but Epaminondas paused and looked back over his shoulder. "Epaminondas tells me you have questions about the oblique wing," he said to Philip. "After your drills, come to my quarters. We will see if the Prince of Macedon can handle the geometry of a battlefield as well as he handles a wrestling clinch." As the generals disappeared into the mist, the four boys let out a collective breath. "Gods," Peithon exhaled, wiping sweat from his brow. "I felt like he was counting my ribs just by looking at me." "He wasn't counting your ribs, Peithon," Philip said, his eyes still fixed on the retreating figure of Epaminondas. "He was calculating our value. And I don't intend to let his math come up short." Philosophy of the Phalanx. 1400 hours, Day 3, a private classroom near the Cadmea, Thebes. The crisp, sharp Theban air, entirely unlike the sun-drenched, argumentative public squares of Athens, carried a completely different kind of ancient wisdom. Here, philosophy was never treated as a detached academic debate. It was a living current flowing directly through the stone barracks, the training fields, and the high council chambers. Philip, Antigonus, Peithon, Leonnatus, and a mentor sat on low wooden benches, their bodies still humming with the heavy, residual ache of the morning's grueling weapon drills. The room was plain, austere, and stone-walled, swept clean of distraction, with only a few detailed maps carved into clay tiles and stacked scrolls breaking the monotony. Their teacher for the afternoon, a lean, sharp-eyed Theban scholar with a voice like quiet iron, stood before a large sand-covered table. He did not speak of abstract, floating concepts of justice. He spoke of Pythagorean harmony, applied directly to the blood, meat, and bone of warfare. A phalanx, the teacher declared, his piercing gaze sweeping across the 5 Macedonian boys, is not merely a collection of armed men standing shoulder to shoulder. It is a single, breathing organism. To command it, you must first grasp its anatomical form. He began arranging small, intricately carved wooden blocks into tight grids across the sand. A rectangular mass of men organized into strict ranks and files. But look closer at the geometry. Each bronze shield, each ashwood spear, each individual man is connected not simply by the physical touch of metal, but by a total, unbreakable bond of absolute reliance. If one single soldier falters, the whole formation falters. If one man breaks his place in the line, it opens a fatal, hemorrhaging wound in the body of the army. Peithon leaned slightly toward Leonnatus, his eyes tracking the teacher's movements across the sand table. "It's exactly like the lyre strings we studied yesterday," Peithon whispered, watching the wooden blocks shift. "If one string is even slightly out of tune, the whole melody collapses." "Except here," Leonnatus muttered back, his jaw tied as he stared at the front ranks of the wooden formation. "If your string is out of tune, you don't just hit a bad note. You get a Spartan spear driven straight through your throat." The teacher moved the blocks with fluid, practiced grace, demonstrating the devastating mechanics of the oblique order. Philip, who typically grew restless during formal, static lessons back in Pella, was utterly captivated, leaning forward with his elbows on his knees. This was the tangible application of abstract thought. It was cold, beautiful logic that he could actually weaponize. "So, it is like a single, massive, living organism," Philip ventured, his brow furrowed in intense thought as he studied the interlocking blocks. "Each part completely dependent on the other, just like the limbs of a human body? And the mind that directs it, the soul of the creature, that would be the general." The teacher's eyes gleamed with a rare, approving light. "Precisely. Prince Philip, you grasp the core principle immediately. And tell me, what happens to a body when it becomes diseased? What happens when its limbs begin to work against each other, or when its mind is clouded by internal faction and conflict?" "It weakens instantly," Philip replied, the answer coming to him with immediate, bitter clarity, drawn straight from the dark, recurring nightmares of the fractured, treacherous Macedonian court. "It becomes vulnerable to every predator. It can even rot from within and die." "Indeed," the teacher affirmed, his voice dropping into a solemn, heavy register. "And so it is with a phalanx, and so it is precisely with a polis. Discord, internal civil strife, and personal ambition overriding the collective purpose. These are the malignant diseases that shatter the mightiest military force on earth. A city divided against itself can never stand the impact." Antigonus leaned forward, resting his heavy, calloused hands flat on his knees, his eyes narrowing as he analyzed the concept. "Is that the true secret? Is that why the sacred band is practically undefeatable? Because they've somehow cured the disease? They have systematically replaced individual ambition with a shared, immortal heart," the teacher replied quietly. "The true strength of Thebes lies not just in our bronze armor or our javelin reach, but in our mind's absolute ability to prioritize the whole over the ego. We train you here not just to hold a weapon, but to seek and protect this internal harmony." Philip looked back down at the miniature wooden blocks arrayed in the sand. A profound, piercing realization settled deep into his chest. The Theban military machine wasn't just a tactical innovation. It was the physical manifestation of an undeniable philosophical truth. He glanced sideways at his 4 companions, Antigonus, Peithon, Leonnatus, and a mentor, realizing with sudden, absolute gravity that for Macedon to survive its own blood-soaked cycle of assassinations and tribal wars, they couldn't simply remain 4 boys surviving in exile. They had to become the very first healthy, unyielding cells of a brand new Macedonian body. Architect's blueprint. Late evening, day 3, the residence of Epaminondas, Thebes. In the evenings, the intellectual journey persisted. Yet, in the more private and intimate setting of Epaminondas' home, the conversations grew deeper, moving beyond theory to the practical application of these profound philosophies. Epaminondas, a general whose very manner exuded discipline, thought, and quiet strength, often spoke of Epaminondas, his closest comrade and the true architect of Theban power. The lamplight in the main room cast warm, flickering pools of light, illuminating the rich textures of the wool rugs and the polished wood of the low tables. The air, often carrying faint traces of roasted lamb or fresh bread, was now tinged with the subtle aroma of the diluted wine Pamines poured. Around the low tables sat Philip and his close companions Antigonus, Peithon, Leonnatus, and Amyntas, who listened in rapt, thoughtful silence as they shared dried fruit on small pieces of cheese from the common platters. Epaminondas, Pamines would say, swirling a modest portion of wine in his cup, his gaze distant and fixed on some unseen point beyond the stone walls of his home, "He understands this better than any man I know. He studied under Lysis, a Pythagorean, and he saw the profound truth in their teachings. It is not just about the strength of the arm, Philip, but the strength of the mind, the clarity of purpose, the understanding that the polis is a living body and each citizen a vital limb. Every action, every decision must contribute to the health and strength of the whole, or it is a cancerous growth that will consume it from within." Philip listened closely, sitting on a low stool, his mind absorbing every word and nuance of Pamines' tone. He noticed how Pamines, like Epaminondas, applied these principles, not just to military strategy but to all areas of his life. Choices in the household, training the young pages, even how Pamines managed his affairs, everything seemed to reflect a quiet commitment to order, efficiency, and a deep sense of interconnectedness. There was no loud shouting, no impulsive commands, just a measured, thoughtful approach, a sharp contrast to the volatile, blood-soaked temperaments they had all witnessed among the Macedonian nobility back home. Antigonus leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees, his sharp eyes narrowing as he weighed the general's words. In Pella, a noble obeys only out of fear or for a bribe, Antigonus thought inwardly, a cynical yet fascinated expression crossing his face. Here they speak of the state as a living organism. If you cut off a limb, the body rots. It's a completely different way of chaining men to an idea. A king, too, must understand harmony, Pamines once mused, his gaze shifting from Philip to encompass the other young exiles, assessing them with sharp, discerning eyes. Not just among his soldiers, but among his people, his nobles, even his own family. Discord, internal strife, the pursuit of individual gain over the common good. This is a poison that weakens the whole. Just as a poorly formed phalanx will break under pressure, so too will a kingdom torn by disunity crumble from within. You have seen this in Macedon, have you not, young princes? Philip nodded slowly, a somber, heavy expression settling onto his young features. Yes, General. All too often. My father's court, it was a constant battleground. Whispers, plots, political murders. It was as if every man sought only his own advancement, regardless of the cost to the kingdom. My brother, Alexander, faced it too. And now Perdiccas, his voice trailed off, the crushing weight of his family's troubled history pressing down on him. Seems an impossible task to unite so many disparate, greedy wills. Peithon shifted uncomfortably on his cushion, staring down at his cup. He's talking about our fathers, our uncles, the entire blood-drenched aristocracy of the north, Peithon thought, a cold knot forming in his chest. Macedon is a pack of wolves fighting over a carcass. How do you turn wolves into citizens? Pamines smiled softly, a knowing, tired smile that revealed the deep scars of his long experience. It is not easy, Philip. It takes wisdom, patience, and often an unyielding hand. But it starts with understanding. Understanding that each man, each family, each group has a place and a purpose within the larger whole, and that the strength of the whole ultimately benefits all its parts. It requires leaders who embody that harmony, who lead by example, who put the state above their own desires. It's a constant effort, like tending a garden. You have to prune the diseased branches, care for the healthy roots, and make sure each plant gets what it needs. He leaned in slightly, his voice lowering to a secretive, compelling whisper. The greatness of a king isn't measured by the size of his palace or the number of his slaves, but by the unity and prosperity of his people. That is the true test of power. Philip Leonnatus clenched his jaw, the profound implication hitting him like a physical blow. A king who serves the state, rather than a state that serves the king, Leonnatus thought, his mind racing. If we brought that philosophy back to Pella, the old guard would try to assassinate us within a week. Amyntas remained quiet, his dark eyes fixed on the flickering oil lamp. It's an engine of absolute control disguised as philosophy, Amyntas analyzed coldly within his own thoughts. and it makes them invincible. Philip absorbed it all, the words resonating deep within the core of his being. He recognized the practical application of this Theban blueprint: meticulous planning behind their campaigns, disciplined execution of their maneuvers, and the unwavering focus on collective cohesion over individual glory. He saw how Theban leaders, driven by a strong sense of duty to the polis, made decisions that prioritized the long-term stability and power of the state, even when it required severe personal sacrifice. It was a philosophy that built armies and shaped nations, one he knew, deep in his young, ambitious heart, he would carry back to Macedon as the ultimate architectural blueprint for the future he wanted to create. It was a vision of absolute order designed to bring eternal clarity to the chaotic bloodbath of his homeland. Physics of the Phalanx. Fifth day, November 5th, the training grounds of the Cadmea, Thebes. The crisp, bright autumn sun beat down mercilessly on the wide, dusty parade ground where the legendary strategist Epaminondas stood with the young Prince Philip. Flanking Philip closely were his companions Antigonus, Peithon, Leonnatus, and Amyntas, their eyes fixed intently on the scene before them. Scattered across the hard-packed earth lay the massive, fragrant silver fir logs that had recently arrived via transport from Macedon. Instead of forwarding the prime timber straight to the coastal shipyards as originally intended, Epaminondas had specifically ordered several logs to be cut into varying lengths and arranged haphazardly across the sand. Most ordinary generals see a battlefield merely as a blind clash of two stone walls, Philip, Epaminondas said, his voice carrying a calm, intellectual gravity, as he gestured to the logs laid out in a traditional, uniformly even line. They naively believe that if their wall is simply longer or thicker than the enemy's, victory is guaranteed. But a wall is entirely static. It absorbs shock rather than delivering it. I want you to look past the wood and see the phalanx as a mechanical lever. Antigonus narrowed his eyes, stepping closer to examine the logs. A lever, Antigonus thought inwardly, his military instincts kicking in. You don't push against a wall with equal force. You find the fulcrum and snap it. With a sharp motion of his boot, Epaminondas kicked the logs into a radically new asymmetrical configuration. Instead of an even, unbroken front, he bunched the heaviest, longest, and thickest logs heavily on the left flank, creating a massive, terrifyingly dense column, while the right flank trailed far back in a thin, diagonal, staggered line. Peithon stared at the geometric shift, a sudden flash of insight dawning in his eyes. He's refusing the right entirely, Peithon realized silently. He's keeping half his army out of the fight, just to deliver an absolute hammer blow with the other half. This is the Lox Phalanx, the oblique order, Epaminondas explained, his hand pointing directly to the heavily weighted left wing. We do not seek to engage or defeat the whole enemy army at once. We deliberately refuse our right wing, keeping it safely out of reach of their strongest troops, while we use our reinforced left like a blacksmith's hammer. We concentrate all our mass, all our physical and tactical weight, onto a single, vulnerable point of the enemy's formation. Once the head of the snake is violently crushed, the rest of the body simply dies of its own accord. Leonnatus clenched his jaw, the profound mechanical elegance of the strategy settling into his mind. It's pure physics applied to human slaughter, Leonnatus thought, a cold shiver running down his spine. You don't need a massive army everywhere. You just need absolute, crushing mass at the exact right second. Philip stepped forward, walking slowly along the staggered diagonal line of logs. His brilliant analytical mind was racing, instantly calculating the vectors of force, momentum, and friction. He saw with blinding clarity how the physics of the lever operated on a battlefield. By dynamically shifting the center of gravity of an entire army, a smaller, outnumbered force could shatter a much larger, overconfident enemy line. Amyntas watched Philip's expression, his own mind dissecting the political implications. He's teaching us how to dismantle Spartan hegemony. Using geometry, Amyntas analyzed quietly within his own thoughts. And he's using our own native timber to do it. Philip stopped, looking down at the Macedonian silver fir logs, the very raw bones and forests of his distant, fractured homeland, being deliberately used here in exile to illustrate the terrifying future of Hellenic warfare. A profound, unshakable shiver passed through him. He realized with absolute certainty That he wasn't just learning a clever tactical formation from an old master. He was learning the exact mathematical formulas required to break the old world open and reshape it. Macedonia, silent mentor. Early November, the queen's private solar, Pella. The palace was deep in shadow, quiet save for the rhythmic, heavy pacing of the palace guards patrolling the stone courtyard far below. A heavy shipment of silver plate returned ostentatiously from Thebes as a ceremonial refining of the queen's royal dowry, sat resting in the absolute center of Queen Eurydice's private solar. To the suspicious eyes of Regent Ptolemy's tax collectors and spies, it was merely a routine exchange of raw bullion and luxury items. Eurydice quietly dismissed her handmaidens, waiting until the heavy oak door clicked shut and the last footsteps faded down the corridor. She approached the largest silver chest. Ignoring the glittering decorative bowls sparkling in the lamplight, her fingers traced the inner rim until she found a hidden recessed peg, a false lining at the base of the crate. A clever trick she had learned years ago from Syracusan fortification engineers. With a soft, muffled click, the false bottom panel slid away, revealing a tightly bound bundle of leather-wrapped cylinders tucked safely inside. At that moment, a soft rustle came from the arched doorway. Her young daughter, Eurydice, slipped quietly into the room, her small sandals making no sound against the woolen rug. Eurydice stopped a few paces away, her wide, observant eyes fixed on the open chest. "Is it from Philip, mother?" Eurydice asked in a hushed whisper, stepping closer as the scent of old parchment drifted into the room. "Is he safe in Thebes?" Eurydice looked up, a tender, protective warmth softening her sharp features as she reached out with one hand to pull her daughter close against her side. She grows more perceptive every season, Eurydice thought inwardly, feeling the slight tension in the girl's small frame. She sees the daggers hidden beneath every court smile. "He is safe, my little bird," Eurydice murmured softly, her thumb brushing a stray lock of hair from Eurynose's forehead. "And he is learning things that Ptolemy and our counselors cannot begin to imagine. Look." Eurydice carefully unfurled the first leather scroll onto the polished wood of the table. It wasn't a court poem, a trade ledger, or a tax roll. It was a series of meticulously, flawlessly drawn tactical diagrams inked by the hand of a master Theban military scribe. Even in the dim lamplight, Eurydice could make out the precise lines of the oblique wing Philip had described in his hurried, infrequent letters. Here, however, it was laid out with cold, terrifying mathematical precision, the exact column depth of the ranks, the precise spacing of the ashwood spears, and the secret visual signals for a coordinated cavalry strike. Eurydice leaned in, tracing a tiny inked spear line with her fingertip. "It looks like geometry," Eurydice whispered, her voice filled with awe. "Not like the wild charges the Macedonian lords make at the frontier. It is geometry, Eurydice said, her voice dropping into a fierce, steady register. And it is worth more than all the gold in Ptolemy's treasury." As Eurydice unrolled the second cylinder, a small unsealed note fluttered out from the bundle, landing softly beside the silver bowls. It was written in Pelopidas's bold, unmistakable, direct hand. Eurydice picked it up, reading the stark words aloud in the quiet room. "The mind of the cub is sharp, queen. I provide the whetstone. Ensure the iron you forge in Aegae is worthy of the hand that will one day wield it." Eurydice felt a rare, genuine surge of fierce hope bloom in her chest. Pelopidas was not merely keeping her youngest son safe across the border. He was actively arming him with the collective, ruthless wisdom of the greatest military power in the Hellenic world. She realized with sudden clarity that while Regent Ptolemy was down in the hall, counting copper coins, seizing estates, and chasing political shadows, she and her sons were secretly building an entire empire of the mind. Eurydice looked up at her mother, her young eyes catching the flickering amber reflection of the oil lamp. "Does Uncle Ptolemy know about this? If he did, we would already be dead, little bird," Eurydice replied quietly, a dangerous, cold smile touching the corners of her mouth. "Which is why these scrolls do not exist." Carefully, meticulously, Eurydice held the edge of the parchment toward the lamp, committing the complex geometry of the Theban wedge to memory before rolling them back up. She knew that if these documents were ever discovered by Ptolemy's inquisitors, it would mean an immediate, agonizing death warrant for them all. But as she tucked the leather cylinders deep into a secret, spring-loaded compartment, hidden behind the cedar paneling of her private library, her smile remained unyielding. The steel princes away in Boeotia now possess the flawless theory to match their raw northern courage. The scattered puzzle pieces of a future Macedonian empire were finally coming together in the dark. To be continued in Episode 10. Thebes, Lion's Education. Watch and listen now. Watch the cinematic video trailer. Listen to the full saga now. Bookmark Volume 1, Talesius Playlist. Volume 2, Eurydice, the Sacred Band Playlist. Bookmark Volume 1, Divine Oracle Playlist. Join the Vanguard. A new episode drops every single day until the epic conclusion of Volume 2. Each chapter delivers a tight, hyper-focused 10 to 30-minute hit of cinematic historical drama, perfect for your daily plunge into antiquity. Subscribe to follow the bloody rise of the Argead dynasty. Thumbs up to help push our Vanguard through the algorithm's gauntlet. Comment below.